All right, we'll get started. Thanks for coming. My name is Matt Raible. Grew up in the backwoods of Montana, no electricity, no running water for 16 years. Had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day. Sad story, but kind of fun. So writing a book is hard. If anyone ever has written a book, how many people have written a book? Okay, so about half the room. It's enough, trouble coming up with the idea, but then the actual writing part is pretty difficult in my opinion. And a lot of that is because getting in the flow, right? And having the tools to help you get in the flow and basically get out of, distraction mode. So you can do it in Word, and the first book I wrote was back in 2004, and I did it in Microsoft Word, and I sent it off to editor, and they turned on track changes, and then they sent it back, and we went back and forth a bunch of times. And it works. Google Docs is much better, but they still both suffer from the same problem, and that is if someone turns or doesn't remember to turn on track changes, or they don't remember to suggest changes in Google Docs, then you basically lose that, and there's really no history in there. I think Google Docs does a little better idea, but you all know that, Microsoft Word is a binary format, so you're not going to be able to see what changed. And copying and pasting code and images into Google Docs is easy, just like it is into Word, but what happens when you need to change that image, and you've used it several times throughout your document or throughout your book? Chances are you can't just search for an image name, right, because it's just a blob. So again, tough to maintain. And so it's really hard to basically maintain those document formats. And I know this because when I wrote the Spring Live book back in 2004, we did 11 releases. And over those 11 releases, there was just this Word doc that went back and forth. And you would hope that the editor turned on track changes for everything, but you'd never know. Like if they deleted a paragraph or something like that, you just wouldn't know. So as writers, we're often limited by our tools. And chances are, if you've written a book and you've done it in Microsoft Word and you didn't experience the pain, maybe you didn't have to update it, but there are better ways to do it. And Asciidoctor is one of those ways. And there is some confusion that I want to clarify. There's two things. There's AsciiDoc, which is the actual syntax you'll use, and then there's Asciidoctor, which is a Ruby tool to actually generate, the outputs. So it's an open source implementation of AsciiDoc in Ruby, and it's basically a fast text processor and publishing toolchain for converting AsciiDoc to HTML5, DocBook, and many more. PDF, mobile, as well as Kindle, and we've even done a ton of work to make it work as a print book. So now what we've been able to do is self-published pipeline going that no one really has to get involved except for some editors. So you write in plain text, you import your code and your images, or you copy and paste your code into the actual document. And then what we found is it's easy to do code reviews and copy editing, right, using Git. And it's one of those things that you'll probably encounter people that do copy editing for you that have never used Git. And they're probably not going to want to use Git, right? But you can introduce them to some tools I'll show you that makes it easy for them to use Git. And so at infoq, my editor had never used it before, but he was a tech-savvy guy, and he was using it, within a day. And when he would create pull requests, maybe there'd be some issues, or maybe he would, delete stuff by accident, but you're using source control, so you can always, revert from that. And like I said, you can publish in all those formats. So the beauty is less cost, less waste, less impact, right, versus the Google Docs or the Word formats. And when I went to write this for infoq at the end of 2015, I had a goal to write a JHipster-mini-book, and the reason for that was I'd done a lot of work with Spring Boot, I'd done a lot of work with Angular, and JHipster kind of combined the projects, and as an independent consultant at the time, I wanted to market myself more. And so the beauty of a mini-book for infoq is it's only like 100 pages, right? And you don't have to write the complicated stuff. So if you know something about a framework or a particular hot technology, you can probably write a book for it, and if you're good, you can probably do it in a month, or maybe you get your employer to actually let you do it, as part of your job. So I chose AsciiDoc because I want it to be like an open source project. I wanted to be able to, use Git and use my IDE and use the tools that I was used to writing code in to write the book in, especially because I was writing a bunch of code for the book as well, and I kind of didn't want to switch, to a Word doc and then back to my code and stuff like that. So there's this Asciidoctor to all example that I used as a starting point, and you can see here there's for Deck.js, there's EPUB 3, GitHub pages, so all of those, but I wanted to do everything, right? I just didn't want HTML, I wanted PDF, and I wanted, the print version and all that. Oh, now you lost it. And I used Jira Cloud to create my task, organize sprints, and track progress. So that was just a personal thing for me. I could have easily used like the Bitbucket actual issue tracker as well. I chose Bitbucket to store my source code in because I didn't want it out in the open. Right? I wanted it to be private, and Bitbucket has private repos. GitHub costs money for them. And so that's where I hosted the source control. And I used IntelliJ to write it in browser sync to basically see changes immediately. And there is good enough tools now within IntelliJ that you actually don't need what I'm going to show you, like this browser sync stuff, but you still can use it if you don't want to use, a particular IDE or a particular plugin. So at the beginning, when I took this idea to InfoQ, they said you should use Word or Google Docs. And then they agreed to Asciidoctor just because they were nice folks, right? They were like, basically, you're going to give us a PDF, and it's going to take us a really long time to convert that PDF into EPUB, into MOBI, and, get it out there, and we probably won't be able to print it. And, but, we'll try. It's probably going to be the most expensive book we ever created. And then we actually figured it out, and it was one of the first times that they had used this tool chain, and they were amazed because guess what? They didn't have to get any production people involved. All they had to get was an editor involved, and then the guy who actually created the artifacts that they upload to the site was me. Right? And so that's pretty cool because you eliminate this whole bottleneck of people that may or may not have time to work on it. So then I took that template from the book and created the infoq-mini-book project, which is here on GitHub. And so you can see the steps to build all the different things. So when we started, we had one process that would basically build the PDF and the HTML and everything like that. But when you're editing, you really don't need all that. All you need is like the HTML version, right? You don't need the PDF to be regenerated every time. So we ended up creating, little bash scripts for everything, but it'll output a number of different files, an index file for HTML5, a PDF prepress, and a PDF screen. So the default is to print the prepress one, which is a PDF that has margins and stuff like that, because if you print a regular PDF, like we sent the first version to Lulu, and guess what we get back? We get an 8.5 by 11 book. Right, with big text in it, and the margins are all whacked and stuff like that. So we had to adjust a lot of things to actually get the margins to look good, to get the print to be smaller, and get it to be like a 6 by 9 book. So then Dan Allen is the founder of Asciidoctor, and he works primarily on that project. His company, OpenDevise.io, does a lot of documentation help for companies and provides consulting on that. So he was great in really helping out InfoQ and myself in figuring all this out and having the different PDF renderers. And AsciiDoc FX was probably the biggest reason it worked for the editors, because editors, you can't really say download IntelliJ and run it. I mean, you can, but they might be a little intimidated, versus AsciiDoc FX is just this app that runs on JavaFX, but they don't know that. And you basically just open up files, and it's got the text on the left and then the rendered version on the right, and they can see everything. So for them, it's very easy. So this is what some of the code looks like, and I'll go through a live demo here. But basically, you just you have paragraphs with just breaks in them, and that creates paragraphs. And then for source code, you can specify what type, HTML, JavaScript, probably even TypeScript might be supported now. And then this is a way of giving a caption to an actual image or a source code. So I felt this was nice because I always mention files that I'm going to edit up here, but I never want to specify the whole path, right? So I think it's nice to put that caption next to it so people can see that. And then down here you can see there's a Java version. So if you were to start with this project and create a book, you would clone my GitHub repo, and then you'd run Gradle W followed by Gradle W watch. And what that does is it watches all your files and sees if anything changes, and if it does, it recompiles everything. And then you'll install Node, and you only need Node if you want to do the actual building of, in browser sync and have it refresh in your browser. It does that with Gulp. And then you can use whatever editor you like. If you want to use IntelliJ or just, VI or Atom or Sublime Text, those will all work. So let me show you a quick demo of what that looks like. So here's the infoq-mini-book, and you can see it's got a whole bunch of files in it. And basically what happens is, I want to show you what's going to happen when you download this project and try it for the first time. So I have to unset one of my environment variables. And then if you do, you're just like, okay, he said to run Gradle W. Oh, it actually worked. You should get an error that says I can't find KindleGen. So that's one of the things that might happen to you. That's why I have this build.sh that sets KindleGen. There it is. All right, no file to load KindleGen. And that's because I haven't automated. There's like one open issue on the project where you can automate the downloading of KindleGen for generating your MOBI files, and I haven't done that yet. So if you use this script, then it does it for you. So build.sh, and it basically cleans and builds everything. And then all the docs end up in this docs folder here, so AsciiDoc, and then chapters. And so mini books are typically really short, right? They're only like maybe 100 pages, so I just have different chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. And you'll notice here, this is the Asciidoctor plugin over here that's rendering my pages. So when I originally created this, they had a plugin, but it wasn't that great. Like, it was based on the Markdown plugin. And so that's why I use this technique, which is the watch, and then gulp. Okay, that's watching. This is not gulping. Come on, gulp. Work. All right, well, I don't have to show you that because there's a much better tooling now where you can do, oh, there we go. So it brings it up in your browser, and basically if you edit anything, it'll show up in here. That's just, a feature of browser sync. So this is just the intro and conventions from my book. So you'll notice I put some to-dos in here, like replace this with yours. If you have anything, then of course your dedication and acknowledgement, the ISBN number that you'll get from infoq, and then the chapters are down here, which is just empty at the moment. So if we went into chapter 1, we said, put some code in there, let you write a book, can be published. These tools, like I said, didn't exist on the right side when I originally started this. So now that's a much better experience than flipping back to your browser and make sure it's in there, right? And so you can also do code. So this is kind of a cool feature. You'll notice it doesn't render in there, right? It says, hey, unresolved directive on the right side, and we go back to there, and it does work. So there is still some advantages to using, the browser sync tools and doing it that way. There's also some cool stuff you can do where you can do like 1.3 and just includes, the first 4 lines. Sometimes. I forget the syntax. Maybe it's 3 of them. But what I found is the problem with actually including files and doing, the line numbers that you pull in is chances are when you modify your source code, it's not going to match with what you have in your text, right? So then what you have to do is you have to go through all of your AsciiDoc files and figure out if the right code is in there. So what I've started to do is just copy and paste the code into the AsciiDoc file because you want to be able to diff it and you want to see what code changes. So it's not a great scenario, but if you're going to pull in specific line numbers, I think it's actually better to do it that way. If you're going to pull in the full file, that's different, right? Because that file can change and you don't worry about the line numbers as much. Right, that's another thing I've seen is that is in another AsciiDoc project I have where you can put tags in there and then you can just specify the tags. So in your source code ends up with these tags, but they don't get seen, right? So works out pretty well. So the editing process we went through is we just share your Git repository with your editor. The editor creates pull requests by section. So if they did chapter 1 or they did the acknowledgments or whatever, and then you would work on collaborating on that. And like I said, because the editors aren't typically Git savvy, you do have some hand holding that you have to do in the beginning, but then you just accept the pull request and merge. For the publishing process, you need KindleGen, then you run that build sh. And this Asciidoctor PDF extensions I want to show you because there's some things that you have to know about that. So this is in main Ruby. And I just hard-coded some stuff in here. So if you were to use this template, you should know that stuff is hard-coded, and that is, if the section ID includes chapter, for these, they're chapter 1, chapter 2, and you'll see up here, that's the ID that it gives. So I just look for those names, and if those are in here, then, go ahead and process this part. And so for media versus prepress, it does some different positioning of the text. And then for these ones, it creates a different section header. So if we look at the PDF that's generated, I got to generate it. So I can do generate PDF screen. It actually has section breaks between the different sections, so that's what's going on here. This is a golden opportunity for any of you that would like to contribute to open source to take out the hard coding, if you would like. But it's just, this is the only real hard-coded part of this file. There is some other stuff up here that I was just kind of lazy, and I was like, if it's a dedication or acknowledgments, then center it and put a bunch of lines under it, just because that was InfoQ's way of doing things. So now we have this PDF screen, and if we open that up, of course you'd want to change the title image, right? This is just the one from my book that I left in as a placeholder. But in the sections, it's got this kind of syntax, and that's for InfoQ, right? That's the style that they did for their books, is have blue and green, and then the chapter name, and then it moves on from there. So that's the part that does. And it was kind of cool because when I did this project, I knew that Asciidoctor was capable of all this stuff just because you could hook into the API with this Ruby file and actually override things. And it was cool to really see it come to fruition. Without Dan Allen's help, I probably couldn't have done it because he really knew the API well and was able to go in there and change all this stuff. Where's my presentation? There it is. And then the Lulu printing thing is new, and I think there's a couple other books that InfoQ has used this template for, so you can print it on Lulu, and it comes as a real book. It looks good, and we went through like 3 or 4 iterations where they sent me a copy of the book to make sure, and now it's a 6x9. The font looks good, the margins look good, and it's cool because it's 140 pages, it's like that thick, like it's a real mini book, right? It looks like one, so that works well. If you're interested in writing, you can talk to me. You can talk to Minibooks at InfoQ. And there's author guidelines there, and basically you retain the copyright. So I could at any moment open source this book, or I could at any moment put it on Amazon under my own name, and they don't really care too much. But you do grant them an exclusive right to publish the free online version, and then if you want them to remove it, they will. So you can start writing on infoq.com. I'll take any questions, but I'd also like to discuss, if anyone's thought of it, the process of open sourcing a book like this. I would love to open source it, but I'm afraid of people taking it, creating PDFs, selling it in other places, right? And then there's all these different versions around, and how do you manage something like that? So first of all, questions.
How long did it take for you to hack that together, all the custom Ruby stuff?
So Dan did most of that, and I certainly helped him, and he gave me some guidelines. So it was probably 6 or 10 hours, right? It wasn't too bad, but it was painful because it was at the end, right? And you were trying to push it out. And that was the other painful thing about InfoQ is I did a second revision of the JHipster book this last summer, and it was done in November, and they wouldn't push it out for another month because they already had a mini book going out. And I was like, man, if you wait too long, it's going to be out of date. And so it was published at the beginning of December. JHipster 4 came out in February. And so it had 2 months where it was up to date.
And, sorry, follow-up question. So was the Asciidoctor FX thing what you used to build it, or was it just Asciidoctor and you just use the FX thing for the editors to go through
Right, for the editing. You could use it just like I used IntelliJ, right, to write the code and then see it on the right. And a lot of times you need dual monitors for this kind of stuff, right, so you can have your code and then your text and everything.
Surprised why they prefer the Asciidoctor FX as opposed to Asciidoctor plugin on, say, Google Chrome.
Right, and there is an excellent Asciidoctor plugin on Google Chrome, so let me demonstrate that. This is already built, but if we were to go to the source code, infoq-mini-book, and it's even a better one to look at the presentation, and you were to go to one of these files, like index, and you view the raw version, this plugin up here, you can disable it or enable it, and then you see exactly how it's going to look. So that's a pretty handy plugin. I just didn't know about it at the time, right? But also the difference is they can't really edit this file, right? They're looking at it versus having it side by side, right? And we kind of went back and forth with like GitHub comments, you know, or pull request comments versus like comments in the code and stuff like that. Just trying to figure it out, you know, what works best for the editor, because we as coders, right, we can figure out most things.
Kind of a meta question, but how important do you think an editor is to the book, especially the new one?
I mean, you could do it in VI, right? You could do it in,
No, I mean the actual copy.
let's advantage the InfoQ. I mean, I've had a lot of editors, right? I've written a few books, and they help me a lot, right? I've learned a lot from them, and just the style of writing and stuff like that. So even if you weren't going to do it for a company like InfoQ, I'd recommend like having a friend or someone that's an English major or something, you know, just look through it, because there's like talking in the we voice, we're doing this versus you doing this, right? So there's good things I've learned from having editors. But if you already have like that kind of background, then maybe you don't need one. And you just hope the open source community like contributes back and tells you what you should change, you know. And the one issue with Asciidoctor as like a documentation framework for projects, if you had an open source project or something like that, it does render on GitHub. It doesn't render as good as Markdown, but the HTML, like if you did something like this and you generate an HTML version of this book, it's one page. So that can be pretty heavy. And they're working on fixing that, but they haven't yet, versus, you know, PDF's fine to be big, but not really HTML. Well, thanks for coming. More questions, please ask. No one's leaving.
Back to the questions you were having, did you explore some of the Creative Commons that would enforce to keep where it's coming from? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in you know, over in some countries, they just might ignore that stuff, right? As far as open source, yeah.
So I'll just share my experience. So I self-published a book a few years ago, and I built it using Sphinx and outputted like PDFs and like a hard copy and everything. And at the bottom of the site for the book, I said, if you don't want to pay for it, just email me, and I would just email you a free copy. And I ended up giving out a lot of free copies, but people still shared them on like the Pirate Bay and whatever. So that was work.
Right.
I
Yeah.
thought that might deter it was the point, but
Well, and the one thing I've seen that Pragmatic Programmers does well when they distribute books is they'll put your email at the bottom. So that's one technique, right? You at least know who it came from, but then you'd have to basically generate a book for everyone, right?
Not necessarily. You can use that PDF, something text.
It's like an annotation tool or something.
Well, it's a general PDF manipulation tool, and you can just add that to the bottom of the page.
Right.
So it's not really generating a new book, it's just adding.
you have to dynamically do it every time, right?
Yeah, so you have to do it every time.
I mean, it wouldn't be hard, but still be kind of painful, you know? Yeah.
Do you suggest use this tool to edit the collaborative documents? So it's easy to manage.
Well, it's basically, have you ever worked with Markdown? So Markdown and AsciiDoc are very similar. I tend to like AsciiDoc because I did a whole book in it, and so I know it really well now. But, you know, I do Markdown as well. So I think it's good, you know, to collaborate on using Git on any sort of document, because you can see the diffs, right? And you know that people haven't changed much. But at our organization, we're still having trouble getting like our editors to actually use it because they like Google Docs. But what we do is we actually copy the Markdown or the ASCII doc into Google Docs, just raw, and then make them edit it there. And then, you know, we can copy it back, we can see the diffs in GitHub, and then go from there. So it works pretty well.
For in collaboration, I recommend a few extra rules on top of that. It's like go at the end of go to the next line at the end of each sentence, and even sometimes just split it in two so that the diff will actually show some specific changes, or if you move them around, then you don't get like a big paragraph that changes. You don't know what's going on.
So you're saying don't have a big long sentence, like wrap it at
Use a paragraph,
120 characters or whatever?
But just do a soft wrap, go to the next line, and AsciiDoc doesn't consider it the next line, it's just
Right.
consider it a single paragraph.
Yep. That's a good point, because when it renders in a diff, it's like that long if you don't break it, you know, and it doesn't care.
Better now, but even like 3 years ago, it was just not working.
Right, right.
I'm curious why you chose to go infoq as opposed to maybe a lean pub or some of the other options out there.
It was mostly for the editor, and I was already a Java editor for infoq, and so it was just kind of an opportunity, and I felt that they would, you know, give me good publicity and, you know, market it well. I don't know if I would say they have, but they do send me books to take to conferences. I just forgot to bring any here. So it was, I already had a relationship there, and I didn't really have to establish a new one. And I was kind of, you know, if they had said you have to use Word or Google Docs, I might have been like, okay, never mind, I'll go figure this out on my own. All right, thanks for coming.